Scaling your business globally? That usually means juggling multiple tools. One for payroll, one for HR, another for IT, and before you know it, things slow down. Or you could just use Deal. Deal is the global infrastructure for work, powered by AI and backed by thousands of in-house experts. From hiring and onboarding to payroll, devices and compliance, Deal handles it all in over 120 countries. One platform, one partner, zero headaches. Book your demo now at deal.com. That's DEEL.com/BT.
This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
So when you are sleep deprived, you're more likely to go for the burger instead of the salad.
Right.
And that is the brain telling you that.
Right.
So don't blame yourself, it's the brain's fault. At the same time, other hormones also go wonky, right? So there will also be a decrease in insulin sensitivity. And as a result, the body try to compensate for that by increasing insulin.
Yeah. So insulin is like a signal for the body to store more fat. So the body tends to start accumulating more fat. Then stress hormones like cortisol also kind of increases.
Hello everyone, I'm Joyce Teo and welcome to Health Check. That was Dr. Shirong, a principal scientist from the A-Star Institute for Human Development and Potential. She specializes in maternal and child sleep. And she joins us here today to tell us more about a recent A-Star study that found that boys who slept 9 hours or more nightly on both weekdays and weekends had a 51% lower obesity risk and less abdominal fat. The study was published in the journal Obesity in October 2025. It used MRI imaging to examine how sleep habits relate to fat distribution in 10-year-olds from Singapore's three major ethnic groups, and that's the Chinese, the Malays, and the Indians. Also joining us is the study's co-author, Dr. Navin Michael, who's a principal scientist from the A-Star Institute for Human Development and Potential. He's an expert in metabolic health in early life, using imaging to study body composition development. Hi, Dr. Chai. Hi, Dr. Navin. Welcome to Health Check.
Hi, Joyce.
Hi, Joyce.
So, Dr. Chai, tell us about sleep. Why is it so important? What happens when children don't have adequate sleep?
So there was a study done by NTU that was published about 10 years ago. They found that about 4 in 10 children aged 6 to 9 actually do not have sufficient sleep. And this statistics actually is also mirrored in our Growing Up in Singapore Towards Healthy Outcome Gusto study cohort as well. And interestingly, what we found was children of that age, so once they enter primary school, that is when we actually see that during the weekday, they don't get enough sleep. Only about 50 to 60% of them get the sufficient 9 hours that is required of them. And then as they progress to upper primary, the number starts to fall. Right. So that is worrying. And then this increasing trend of sleep deprivation also mirrors the obesity trend that we are seeing, right, Navin?
Yep.
Yeah. Of course, globally, there's a lot of studies that looked at sleep deprivation and how it's linked to obesity. But a lot of these studies use very basic measurements or crude measurements, if I may say. So they use body mass index, the BMI, or very basic things like waist-hip ratios. There are really very few studies that actually uses magnetic resonance imaging to really quantify the amount of fat under the skin and between the organs. As we know, like visceral fat and deep subcutaneous fats are the ones that are most predictive of metabolic risk.
Right. So what exactly happened then? What did you find out when they don't have enough sleep?
So we actually looked at children who are age 10. We asked the caregivers to report the sleep patterns, and we also get them to wear a little watch to objectively measure their sleep. And then we measure their height, weight. We took a blood sample to actually measure the inflammatory markers. We also use a quantitative magnetic resonance to measure the total fat and lean mass of these children. And then at age 10 and a half, we put them into the scanner to quantify the volumes of the various fat tissues. We found that, in particular, boys who did get the 9 hours of sleep that is recommended by the US National Sleep Foundation, they have half the obesity risk. And they also have lower inflammatory markers, lesser of all the fat depots that I've mentioned above. So here we actually use the glycoprotein acetyl as an inflammatory marker, and we found that it's much lower in those that actually met the 9 hours of sleep per day. Inflammation is actually linked to obesity.
Yeah, so I think it increases the risk for other chronic diseases. It's this chronic state of subclinical inflammation. And the specific marker which we have measured reflects that low-grade inflammatory kind of state. So it creates a kind of predisposition for other kind of chronic diseases.
Oh, I see. So they already have that in the blood.
Yes, correct.
Right.
Already at least
So
10
they are
years.
at
Yeah.
higher risk of, say, the heart disease.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And we also noticed something very interesting. A lot of the children in Singapore, they don't sleep enough on the weekdays, but they catch up on weekends.
Yes, most people do that.
Yeah, even adults actually.
Yes.
Yeah. So the next part of the study was actually to see if this weekend catch-up sleep actually helps to pull in any benefits at all in terms of the inflammation and the fat volumes that we have mentioned. And sadly, it doesn't.
Oh, no.
So only the children that meet the sleep recommendation on both weekdays and weekends actually see the full benefit of having reduced fat volumes and a reduced risk of obesity.
Right, so you have to do it like
You have to be
consistently.
consistent, yes.
Oh, okay. But that kind of like goes against some of the sleep recommendation, right, from sleep experts. Like, if you don't have enough sleep during the weekdays, you catch up during the weekends.
So I see a lot of articles on the social media that says, weekend sleep actually benefits the heart and all these things. So I think there's a huge caveat that they didn't really go in depth. So what they're comparing to is if you're sleep deprived completely, yes, of course, weekend catch-up sleep will help. Yeah. But compared to, in this case, having enough sleep throughout the week, that is still the winner and the gold standard that we should aim for.
Right. So nothing beats that.
Nothing beats that.
So weekend sleep is, of course, if you don't have enough sleep, then you need
Correct.
to,
Yeah.
catch up. So back to this same recommendation that earlier we were
Yes.
talking about. It's really hard to get people to sleep enough, right? Get parents to get their children to sleep enough as well. You mentioned that in Singapore, boys and girls, right, in upper primary, they don't have enough sleep. Are they studying more because of that?
I don't know. I hope so. But I guess partly it could be because of like early start time. And if they do have a lot of homework, it will eat into their rest time. Yeah.
That's true. But you're an expert on sleep, right? I mean, have you looked at whether children should maybe get a later start because of the changes in their circadian rhythms?
This is especially true for adolescents because we know that once the children enter puberty, there will be a chronotype shift. So they will have a very low sleep drive. It's going to be quite difficult to get them to sleep at 9 p.m. like when they're in primary school.
Right.
And I know that there are a lot of advocates for this, like Professor Michael Chi has spoken extensively on this topic as
I've
well.
had him on the podcast.
Yes. But I guess all is not lost because if we, parents and children, recognize that sleep is actually a non-negotiable priority and we try to work around it, make time for it, I think it's still very possible to get the recommended sleep duration.
So, okay, let's get back to the study, right? So we were talking about the effects, and we're actually talking more about boys, right? Because you mentioned in the study that a weaker association was observed in girls, right? Why is that so?
There are a few possibilities, but in this case, we actually measured the fat deposits in the abdomen. And there is actually a sex difference in terms of how or where they deposit the fats. So for boys or males in general, they tend to deposit in the abdomen, which gives rise to the pot belly that we see in a lot of middle-aged men. Whereas in ladies or in females, they tend to deposit the fats more in the hips and in the thighs. And also in general, we found that boys or males tend to have higher obesity rates as well in our cohort and I think globally as well.
Right. Dr. Navin, can you tell us more about the trends then of obesity in children and adolescents?
Yeah, so if you look at the National Population Health Survey data, starting from 2020, we have been seeing an increasing trend in the prevalence of obesity in young adults, so between ages 18 to 29. So it has nearly doubled from around 6.6% to around 11.6% in the latest survey. So what are the implications of this? So obesity substantially increases the risk for type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Most of this disease burden is currently concentrated in middle age and older age. If this current trend continues, what could likely happen is that we pull forward all this kind of risk at a much earlier stage. So we have earlier disease onset, a longer duration where people have to live with the disease. And since this is the most productive periods of their life, this is likely to have an impact on their quality of life, productivity, as well as the cumulative health burden. So if you want to understand how this situation is likely to evolve in the next decade or so, we need to basically look at the people who are waiting in the wings, right? The children and adolescents. If you look at the trends in that particular population right now, the obesity prevalence is around 13% in children between 6 to 18 years. So obese children, nearly half of them continue to be obese adolescents. We have a fairly high persistence. But then the persistence is markedly higher between adolescence and adulthood. So 80% of obese adolescents continue to be obese adults.
So got to catch them early.
Yeah. So if you want to address obesity earlier in childhood, it has to be through very indirect mechanisms because children do not have enough self-autonomy. So essentially you need to target the parents, the schools, the caregivers, etc. So adolescence is the first transitional kind of phase where children are developing autonomy, they're developing self-management skills, etc. So this is an opportune time to basically influence their long-term life habits and their relationship to sleep, diet, exercise, etc.
Right, which links back to the study.
Yep.
But let's talk about how we measure obesity then in children, right? Obesity and overweight, because that's different. So in Asia, obesity means having a BMI greater than or equal to 25.
So globally, obesity is usually defined as BMI greater than 30. So this is the most commonly used cutoff. So what researchers have found is that the risk for metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease in Asians emerges at much lower levels of BMI. So I think what they have seen is that at a comparable levels of BMI, Asians tend to carry much more fat than non-Asians. So the risk associated with BMI tends to emerge much earlier. So in Asians, obesity is usually defined, or we call it a high-risk BMI, is defined using 27.5. So that's the usual cutoff we use to define high-risk kind of BMI. But for reporting population-level statistics of obesity, we still use the kind of the globally cutoff so that the obesity rates can still be compared with other countries.
Okay. But, so if that's the case, because that's for study purposes, right? You want to compare it with international standards.
Yes, correct.
But for the people here, what kind of numbers should I be looking at then?
So I think the metabolic risk already starts getting elevated in Asians at around 23 and substantially kind of increases once it kind of crosses around 27.5.
Mm-hmm. So this study, you said you are using MRI scans, right? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So what BMI is kind of measuring is giving you a kind of measure of overall kind of body fatness. What that doesn't tell us is about where the fat is sitting. So you can have two individuals with very similar BMI but having very different health risk, because they can have very different fat distribution. So fat can be stored in the lower body. So lower body fat is considered to be generally healthier. So generally women tend to store more fat in the lower body. So this is the pear-shaped body shape. Mm-hmm. Whereas men have a tendency to store more fat in the upper body, particularly the abdomen. And within the abdomen, we can have fat beneath the skin. This is what we call as subcutaneous fat. We can also have fat accumulating around the organs. This is called visceral fat. So visceral fat is much more dangerous and it substantially increases the risk for type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, etc. So it's difficult to get a direct readout of subcutaneous fat and visceral fat. It's not as easy as weight and height. So you need to use more sophisticated instruments. So the instrument which we use is magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. And using those images, we can extract detailed volumes of how much fat is there in subcutaneous fat and how much fat is there in the visceral fat.
Oh, I see. So it's to find out the distribution of these
Correct.
two types of
Correct.
fat. But say at home, right? I mean, what can parents do? So is it just looking at your child and then the shape?
Yeah, so a lot of this imaging is done only in research setting. So the kind of simplest kind of metrics which parents can use is essentially use things like waist to height ratio. So that's a good surrogate for your abdominal adiposity. Mm-hmm. So typically, if the ratio of your waist circumference exceeds half of your height, that's when you get a signal that probably you're having excess abdominal adiposity. So this is a simple metric to basically track whether you're having excess fat accumulation in the abdomen.
So you can just take a measuring tape,
just take the waist circumference,
measure the waist,
and just see if it is more than half the height. So
I see. Okay. There's all these things like the fat pinch test, right?
yeah, the skin fold thickness also gives a good proxy for your subcutaneous kind of fat. But again, I think waist circumference is a bit more easier because then there's a lot of variability in how much you are pinching the skin and whether you are qualified and trained to do it properly or not. So even when we do those kind of assessments in our research studies, the people who are doing the measurements on the ground, they had to be constantly retrained so that they are following the appropriate kind of protocols, etc. So probably for parents and the general public, it might be much more easier to maybe just use a tape and just measure the waist circumference.
Okay, so that's good to know. And then, of course, children need to sleep more, I think, especially in Singapore, right? Yeah, so Dr. Chai, tell us about it. Let's say they really don't have time, they have to study. Okay, let's say they don't really have that much screen time and they need to study. So what is like the minimum amount of sleep for children today?
For this study, we are looking at primary school going children. Mm-hmm. So for this age group, between 6 to about 13. The US National Sleep Foundation recommends 9 to 11 hours of total sleep. So in the event that for whatever reason you're unable to get 9 hours at night, maybe try to sneak in a short nap to clock the number of hours. But we don't recommend having too long as well, because it will then eat into your sleep desire or sleep drive. So if your nap is too long or too late, then you will find yourself getting into a vicious cycle of not being able to fall asleep at night.
Right, that's
Right,
true.
yeah.
Okay. So, but basically, you can take a little nap and then just try to clock in that amount of
9
sleep
hours, yeah.
on a daily basis.
You expect more for preschoolers, so preschoolers will need at least 10 to 12 hours.
How about 13 to say 16?
8 hours, I believe. Yeah. So as you get older, it actually decreases until it will start to plateau when you reach adulthood after 18. So you just need 7 to 9 hours.
Right.
Right.
But still, a lot of adults don't get that kind of
I know.
sleep. All right. So this study, I mean, is interesting. Does it apply to adults?
A lot of findings, I think, would extend because the principle and the mechanisms are the same, essentially. Right? Because sleep deprivation really does cause the hormones to become imbalanced. And that is the mechanism that drives why sleep deprivation can lead to adiposity or obesity. Because what happens is a lot of hormones will just go wonky, right? There will be a decrease in leptin, which is the satiety hormone, and increase in ghrelin. So essentially, you feel hungry all the time.
Right.
And in fact, it will also increase the activity in the brain reward center. So what happens, you will start craving for fast food, fried food, high energy, high calorie, or high sugar, sugary snacks, for example.
Wow. Okay.
So when you are sleep deprived, you are more likely to go for the burger instead of the salad.
right.
And that is the brain telling you that. So don't blame yourself, it's the brain's fault. At the same time, other hormones also go wonky, right? So there will also be a decrease in insulin sensitivity. And as a result, the body try to compensate for that by increasing insulin. And sleep deprivation is also a stressor for the body. And then the cortisol, the stress hormone, also increase. So with the increase in cortisol, increase in insulin, both of which actually promote fat storage.
Yeah. So insulin is like a signal for the body to store more fat. So the body tends to start accumulating more fat. Then stress hormones like cortisol also kind of increases.
Right. So when you don't sleep enough, you're actually causing yourself all this stress that you don't even know.
Yeah.
Okay. So parents should also sleep early so that, you set a good example to your children.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think modeling is an important part of it because children model a lot of their behavior from their parents. So probably I think, so it needs to be kind of probably a whole of family kind of effort, I think, yeah.
Okay, that's good. But of course, easier said than done, right?
Yes.
But that's something that we should all do. Yeah, because I always want to talk about sleep and how important it is. It's just that it's so hard to get the message across, right? Like you would know, right, Dr. Choi? So what do you do then, to encourage people to sleep more, especially children?
I think I would recommend that parents, like what Navin was saying, model these good habits as well, as because at this age, they will just emulate their parents, right? Of course, it's also important that parents and children recognizes the importance of sleep. It is not a waste of time. I think a lot of parents actually do not know that sleep also helps with cognition. It helps with cognition, it helps with physical growth, because during slow wave sleep or deep sleep, actually growth hormone is also released. So the child actually can gain in height as a result of sleep. So what are some of the good sleep hygiene habits that parents can reinforce? One of them is to have consistent bedtime, right? Because we actually follow a 24-hour internal clock called the circadian rhythm. And the circadian rhythm actually regulates a lot of biological processes, and one of them being the sleep-wake cycle. So at regular time, you will release sleep-wake hormones, right? So at a particular time, you will feel sleepy because of the sleep hormone that is being released. So it makes sense to sleep at the same time. Because if you sleep at 10 on one day, 12 on one day, your body gets very confused because they say, when should I produce my melatonin? Right? So if you sleep at a fixed time, you'll find that it's so much easier to actually fall asleep because your body will go into a cycle and say, okay, 10 o'clock, I'm just going to release melatonin and just go to bed. Right. So consistent bedtime is important, and bedtime routine also helps. And of course, this bedtime routine should not include screen, which is generally recommended to not have screen time 1 hour before bed. So bedtime routine could be something that helps you to wind down, listening to music, reading a book, taking a shower, for example. Yeah. And of course, having a very conducive environment, like one that is quiet, one that is cool, and one that is dark. Other things that can help with sleep is exercise. But again, not too close to bedtime, because if you have too much excitement and too much adrenaline, it's going to affect your sleep again. And like I mentioned, avoid long or late naps. Avoid heavy meals as well. And that is also some metabolic concerns. But you will feel very uncomfortable if you sleep right after a very, very heavy meal. And of course, to avoid caffeine too close to bedtime.
And that's for adults now, right?
Yeah. That's the thing, you see. So we always assume that children or adolescents are not taking caffeine. But there's a lot of caffeinated food and drinks. Have you seen the number of bubble tea shops we have around here? So unknowingly, the adolescents and children are consuming caffeine without really consciously thinking that, they're not taking coffee, but they're actually taking other caffeinated drinks and food as well.
So what are some of these things? Bubble tea and...
So tea, Coke or energy drinks contains caffeine. Yeah.
Children shouldn't be taking energy drinks, right?
Yeah, but
they do.
But they will think that the milk tea is cool to be drinking.
I think it's more that.
Yeah, it's more that, right? Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So children aged 6 to 13 should be sleeping 9 to 11 hours. And there's so many benefits to it, right? It helps them grow and then it boosts their immune system.
And cognition.
Yes,
I know
cognition.
That's very important to Singaporean parents.
And it helps them to remember what they're studying in school.
Yes.
Which is a key benefit.
Yes.
And then it helps with their mood as well, right?
Yes.
That's great. And then when it comes to obesity and...
Yeah, so I think some of the longer-term implications of this abdominal fat accumulation. So fatty liver is very strongly correlated to visceral fat. So fat accumulation in the liver is a kind of an early warning signal. You can have fairly normal glucose readings, but then having fatty liver puts you on track to a substantially higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes within the next 5 to 10 years. So that's another reason why I think we should be focusing on fat accumulation in the abdomen.
But in children, they usually don't go for screening, etc. You have no idea.
Correct. So that's one of the major kind of problems. So this is fat which is kind of quite invisible, right? So it's very difficult to basically see how much fat is accumulating in the liver without very sophisticated instruments. So typically to accurately measure liver fat, you need MR imaging. But other proxy surrogates are kind of available. So typically in your health screening reports, you typically have liver enzymes. So these are not perfect proxies for liver fat, but then having abnormal levels of liver enzymes. So these are kind of proxy marker for having a fatty liver.
Okay.
And over the longer term, we are also thinking, so there are other proxy scores like fatty liver index, which essentially uses multiple common laboratory measurements as inputs. Things like your triglyceride levels, your waist circumference, your liver enzymes. So all these go into this algorithm to come up with a score for fatty liver. So one thing which could potentially be done is to incorporate these kind of quantitative scores into your health screening reports so that parents and adults, they can have a kind of concrete quantitative readout of how much liver fat they're having.
Okay, that's a good idea, Dr. Navin. So with that, we've come to the end of the podcast. Thank you for your time, Dr. Navin, and thank you for your time, Dr. Chai.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Joyce.
Well, that's a wrap for Health Check, a podcast series by the Straits Times. Don't forget to follow Health Check for free on your favorite audio apps, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Like us and give us a rating. This episode is edited by Amirul Karim. Thanks for listening.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening.